Welcome to The Space Between. On this episode, I am joined by Dr. Talia Shafir. Talia holds a PhD in somatic and spiritual psychology, focusing on somatic movement, trauma, and memory processing. Her work highlights the importance of body movement and its role in managing life's challenges. Together, we discuss the link between somatics, the body, trauma, and movement. We review how trauma is stored in the body, how the body holds clues to what needs to be processed, and how movement is key to moving beyond the past and embracing the present. Join us as we connect through conversation. Welcome to The Space Between. I'm Alyson Rixner, and I'm very excited to have you back for another episode of the Space Between podcast. And today I am welcoming Talia Shafir to the Space Between. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so happy that we connected and that you've offered to come and talk to us about somatics and somatic psychology.
Yes, I'm really happy to be here.
Yes. And we were connected by a mutual friend. Shout out to Mr. Daryl Gaines.
Yes.
And
astrologer extraordinaire.
Astrologer extraordinaire. He has been a guest on the podcast quite a few times, which is, he's graced us with his genius and light and wisdom. And we're really happy that you were offering to come on and talk today. So as far as the space between, I always like to kind of start our episodes with what is it, because it is an interesting sort of series of words. And the space between is really this interesting transitory time of great change. We have been through a lot in the last couple years. It has been wild and crazy in a lot of ways. And we can't go back. All we can do is move forward. And my hope for this work is to have people connect through conversation, whether it's with themselves or someone in their life, and how we relate to the things in our lives, and the ultimate being the connection that I think we're all really seeking right now is that connection. So,
yeah, it's what's at the basis of everything, you know.
Absolutely.
I mean, why do people come to therapy?
Yeah,
because they want to connect.
Yes. And
the person who's in therapy is going, I want to connect, but
right,
him, her, them,
it,
right? My mother.
Absolutely.
It's not one thing; it's my mother, and you know. And it's harder to, you know, look at your participation in the dynamic, but that's what we have to do.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. So, Talia, we're going to talk about somatics and somatic psychology today. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little about who you are and what you do, and then we'll get into the theme and the definition, and we'll kind of go from there.
Okay. So, I have a PhD in somatic and spiritual psychology, and I kind of came into everything through a back door. So, I mean, if you know, you looked at my progression, I've got a BA from NYU in Near Eastern Literature and Languages, and a double MA from Columbia University in Linguistics and Teaching English as a Second Language, and here I am as a somatic psychologist. Okay, how did that happen? Well, you know. It really, if you look back on the route anyone has taken up until, you know, today,
right,
you can find that thread,
right?
You know, and in fact,
regardless of how the path has moved, and
I'll tell you, I was a director of sales and marketing for a couple of companies in Silicon Valley in the 80s. 90s.
Wow.
And I always give credit where credit is due. I always say, you know, some of my best advice and psychological understanding comes from sales, you know.
Salesperson.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Really. No, it's like, you know, you really have to listen to the person. You have to understand what they want.
Yes.
You know.
If you're a good salesperson.
If you're a good salesperson, yes. So, yeah. So what I do is I'm a therapist. I'm also a somatic movement therapist. I do something called dynamic embodiment, which is an elegant synthesis of Laban movement analysis, which comes out of dance, and body mind centering.
Okay.
A body of work by no pun intended, by Bonnie Bainbridge Cohn. And all of these, it's like everybody's looking at the same thing from a different angle, in a different depth, right?
Wow. Yes.
Yeah. So, while I have many pieces of paper to, affirm that I have taken this many hours here and that many hours there and suffered through many a term paper and a dissertation, I really want to emphasize that there's no one way is it.
Right.
There's no one way. It's about, of course, collecting as many skills and keeping up with information and taking care of yourself and taking, learning and continuing to experience things, your own self. So, that when you come face to face with the person in front of you, you are listening, and the lens through which you are looking gets wider and wider and wider, so that you can help the person through. We're widening the rabbit hole. Let's put it that way.
Right. That's beautiful.
So I work with any issue that you would come to any talk therapist with, but if you stay on the talk level, it's a level. It's not bad, but it kind of misses a lot.
Yeah.
And the research I did for my doctorate took an adult attachment assessment tool that is coded through language. It's very interesting. It's called the Adult Attachment Picture Projective Profile.
Interesting.
Don't ask me to repeat
Those are
that.
interesting words all strung
Right.
together.
No T-shirts. We're not making a T-shirt. Okay. But it's called the AAP, so I will refer to it as that.
Got it.
And which codes is coded by language, and it is it's the perfect assessment tool to pair with movement analysis, and someone who is aware
Right.
of movement and developmental structural displays of when you're talking and
Right.
what do you do,
Yeah.
how do you move. So that I created a piece of research that, it was doctoral. It wasn't, 100 people. But it shows that what we actually learn when people go to learn things like somatic experiencing and sensory motor psychotherapy, the main forks of somatic trauma therapy.
Okay.
You're watching, your self-awareness, and you're basically paying attention to introspection, what's going on in my body, and allowing that energy to flow through, and reorganizing, kind of rewiring the brain so that you don't, create the same emotional charge when a piece of sensory input, no matter how small, comes and taps you on the shoulder.
Right. And I think if we could pause right there, that's because I met you and we had a conversation, and even though I thought I knew something about somatics, I had no idea that somatic psychology even existed. It's important for people to understand, number one, again, we're not saying talk therapy is bad.
No.
It has its place, but there is a level. And I think a lot of what we've talked about in this podcast is how the body is, I don't want to say the opening, but we haven't paid enough attention to, as a society, to the body and what that can do in healing and in the self-discovery path and, trying to figure out your life and all of the things. So when you say somatic, right, we'll go into the definition. First of all, the Oxford Dictionary had no definition of somatics, which I was like, wow, doesn't that just make so much sense and then be so ridiculous? Two things can be true. Same time. I've never, this is, I think, like the 12th or 13th episode I've shot. There's always been a definition. So that was like very funny to me.
Oh, good. Well, more room for me.
Absolutely.
Actually, I can't take credit for that. There's a very wise man by the name of Thomas Hanna that created the word somatic. And it comes from soma, Greek.
That's what I found.
You know.
So it stands for soma.
For body.
The living body in its wholeness.
Yes.
That was the only definition. I was like, okay.
Hey, works for me.
Yeah.
First of all, trauma.
I felt that in my body. The
Did you?
living body in its wholeness. It's
There you go.
It is whole.
You know, your head, I hate to point out the obvious, is part of your body. Okay.
God, I live so much up here.
Let me enlighten you.
I'm trying to live more down here.
You know, look, first of all, trauma happens in the body, not in the brain. Your brain is interpreting your body's experience.
Yes.
Okay. So, you know, if I don't know, this microphone has something that reminds you of something that happened,
Right.
that I'm going to have a different level of emotional reaction having this microphone so close to me.
Absolutely.
You know, microphone for me has absolutely no energy to it. It's a microphone,
Right.
you know.
It's agnostic. But for some people, it can be really
Yes, it depends.
impactful.
Yeah. So what are we talking about? We're talking about what experiences, and those are physical, emotional, cognitive, spiritual, even, meaning the larger view.
Yes.
What does that bring us in terms of how do we react? How do we see things? Through what lens are we viewing? And it's really interesting because, you know, if you think about it, if you're startled, okay, just startled, right? And, you know, it happens, boom, just like that.
Right.
But it takes a while for you to calm down.
Yeah.
Well, if it's a trauma and it's PTSD or a re-traumatization of something,
Right.
and it's deep, and so here comes the attachment piece,
Right.
then it's going to take quite a while for that energetic protective field,
Right.
let's call it, to come back down, and you can relate to where you are.
Right. And I think that's what you meant too, just to clarify something for me and maybe for others. When you said there's a sensory input, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's make an assumption. You were walking through something and a bunch of microphones fell in your head. This is very unlikely. This is actually a good.
Well, it's New York.
Well, this is true. And we are in a podcast studio, to be
Yes.
fair. But, you know, if you, obviously there was sensory things that happened, maybe you got injured or whatever, and I don't know if this is the right way to ask it, but seeing the microphone can be a similar-ish sensory input that's happening, even though they're not falling from the sky onto your head. Correct? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Okay.
it's even more so. It's the proximity of the microphone.
Right.
So just to give you an example, you know, people say, well, what do you do? You know, well, what do I do on any given day? It varies. It's
Right.
like, what are you coming at me with? And let's see, well, we're going to move. And so what I would do in your hypothetical example is, you know, I would watch your body kind of withdraw just a little bit.
Interesting.
Probably.
Right.
Get some, you know,
Physical protection.
Yes, and it can be very subtle because, of course, I'm being a human. My brain is trying to override my nervous system,
Right.
and I'm trying to be good, and I'm trying to be cooperative, and you know, there's another attachment.
Oh, yeah.
Defense process. So, you know, but maybe I'm just doing that, and you know, and somebody comes over and just abruptly moves the microphone toward me.
No, this isn't close enough.
Yeah, and I'm, you know, so I just make
Right.
just very subtly, I might do this. So what do? We start with the microphone over there. I will not put it over there because the technician will probably go nuts. But, you know, let's say we start with it on the other side of the table.
Right.
And I'm having you tune in.
Right.
And I'm saying to you, just stop me when it's uncomfortable, and we'll move it back till it's comfortable. And this can be 4 or 5 sessions till your body gets that it's not actually happening again. You're not in danger. You know, so this is about safety and threat.
Right.
Survival. What is survival about? It's about safety and threat.
Exactly. And it's important. And I think a lot of people, especially people that are listening to this podcast, will know the fight or flight, right? We have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system.
We have more than that.
I'm sure that there's a plethora, and especially like with the energy work that you do, I can't even imagine how many angles that you can look at this in. But that's ultimately like, it's the same thing where the threat may not really be a threat. There may be, in my case, I had horrible anxiety for a big chunk of my life. And so just the thought of the threat maybe even happening in the future would send me into a fight or flight. So that's so interesting. Okay, so let's go back to the microphone example, right?
Okay.
So how would you, let me see how I can put this. How do you, overarching as a somatic psychologist, think about the microphone, whatever the trauma is, right? We can insert, because you did mention, with talk therapy, there's a level, and, people know that you're generally in therapy for a really long time. What is the overarching view of what it is that you do when it comes to these traumas that you have?
Well, I can give you my overarching view.
Absolutely.
First of all, there's a couple of things about trauma. One is shock trauma, and there is a difference. It really depends on what the trauma is, how old you were when it happened, where you were, context. It's about context, and there are somatic reactions that say shock. There's a lot of freeze. It's not just fight, flight. It's fight, flight, freeze.
Okay.
And, what happens is that when you try to fight against something and it doesn't work, and then you try to flee and it doesn't work, there's freeze involved,
right?
Which I tend to believe, or from what I've seen, that freeze actually is a momentary thing that happens even before the fight flight.
Right.
There's just a few, there's that.
Right.
But it's all without the conscious mind's participation. It's happening. It's a physical reaction, a nervous system reaction.
Right.
When none of those work, what we do is we go on to something called submit. I'm going to call submit.
Okay.
And then attach. Attach meaning, okay, you might be an abusive parent or partner or coworker or, and I use abusive with a broad brush.
Yeah.
But it's in the long run, it's better that I at least have you there. I'll take proximity over, and I'll adjust to the rest. I'll take proximity over, walking away. Okay.
Yeah.
So, as children, that happens.
Absolutely.
So, but what happens when we're adults? So, an adult has these brain maps. We have these maps, otherwise we couldn't, we learned to drive a car. Every time we got in the car, it'd be Groundhog Day. This is the gas, and this is the, what's this thing? Oh, it's a seatbelt. We don't do that for very good reasons. It's for efficiency.
Right.
And so, efficiency is a good word. What we're trying to do is be more efficient as we move through the world.
Right.
But, I'll tell you, unresolved trauma that's there, and the attachment container that lies underneath this and creates limitations sometimes is so, it's right there, it's right in front of your nose, but it is so familiar that we don't recognize it. And it takes something happening in our lives to create a crack in the picture.
Wow.
So it can be complicated, but once you get that what you're doing, this is my view of therapy. Once you get what you're doing in therapy is identifying patterns.
Right.
Not sitting and complaining every, look, there's room for complaint. Absolutely. Yeah. There's a time to talk.
But after a while.
But after a while, it's, you have to pay attention to what your body is doing. Now, there are several ways to do that. And by the way, I just want to take a sidebar here for a moment.
Please.
Because you've been using the word somatics.
Yes.
And somatic psychology. So let's, since I'm a somatic movement therapist, right, that has trained in somatics.
Right.
Okay. Somatics is about the body and what's going on with the body. Somatic psychology is adding a somatic component of observation and a somatic tool bag to psychological pieces. You've got dance movement therapy, which is a fantastic, modality where people are actually licensed psychotherapists, using dance movement.
Yeah.
I think that the best thing that can happen in therapy, whether it's me going through my stuff or working with somebody, is when you suddenly realize, oh, wait a minute, that's not happening anymore.
Right.
Right. I say it.
Close that chapter.
Yeah, it's like, it's like a contract.
Right.
It's like a contract. The question is, what contract do you keep renewing, annually, even though it expires?
Or daily. Yeah. Okay. Or moment by moment.
Yes.
It happens. Yeah.
That expired quite a while ago,
Potentially decades ago.
Yes, but that's the hardest question to answer.
Right.
Because it is unconscious.
Right. So, and it still feels real.
Well,
wherever it's
that's right. Because the unconscious is driving our behavior.
Exactly.
If I were conscious of the unconscious, they wouldn't call it the unconscious. Right. Should we just
That's a mind trip there.
Right there. Don't ask me to repeat. So, so somatics is body-oriented, pain and movement and, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And I had that. So somatic psychology, this I got, and I would love your thoughts on this. So one of the things that these couple articles, because I did my research before I came here.
Excellent.
Aside from just our conversation. So, of course, somatics is the body, right? A lot of what they said about somatics is how it's an inside job, right? So with somatics, you're feeling into your body. Obviously, if someone's helping you with that, there's a third person viewpoint. But with somatic psychology, what they were trying to say, and you tell me if this is right or wrong, it helps people gain awareness of their body through a mind-body connection.
Yeah. I have something to say about that.
Please.
Okay.
Because we talk a lot on the podcast about narratives. And a lot of what's happening in the space between is those narratives and I call it the old guard, right, is really breaking down because we've come far. There's a lot of new that is being birthed. Daryl and I talk about this all the time. It's a new age. So if that isn't what it is.
Well, it's not that it isn't what it is, but it's, a somatic approach to the therapeutic process is about using the body as a portal to break down limitations and understand what it is you're thinking is doing and how your limitations have crafted your ability to protect yourself so that you don't even feel like you're protecting yourself. It's just like, oh, well, that's what happened. And when you realize what is going on, it's funny. I would say that the basic thing that we're all trying to avoid is loss.
Yeah.
When John Bowlby created his attachment theory, there are 3 volumes, and the thing that is the hardest to handle is loss. But that whole body of knowledge was created by looking at the kids in England the UK who during World War II were shipped off to the country, separated from their parents.
Wow.
They, Dr. Judith Kestenberg, who created the Kestenberg movement profile, which is, somatics and somatic psychology coming together. She was a psychoanalyst. She was a Holocaust survivor. She basically worked with orphans from the Holocaust. I mean, where does all this whole body of knowledge come out of?
Right.
It's how we deal with loss and what loss does to us from a very early age. And that's where he clashed with Freud. Because Freud was like, okay, the only thing you need mother for is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And,
right.
and after that, can be replaced. So thank you, Freud. But it turns out that that's not what's going on.
No.
So, fast forward to how we look at it today. It's the basic job of a parent, especially mother, but then after 8 months, it kind of spreads out,
right,
is to regulate the child's nervous system and to teach them about regulating their emotions, whether it be a process of self-regulation or interactive regulation. In other words, a mature adult knows, has some ways to cope,
right,
as a support system, but also knows when it's time to reach out, get help, and then when they've had enough, then they come back to themselves.
Right.
That actually is why I don't believe in therapy as a national pastime. Yes, is it going to, whatever you're coming about, to talk about, to explore because you've run out of ideas.
Right.
Didn't happen overnight.
No.
It's not going to, it's not going to go away. Not if you really want to understand what's going on and make a change that lasts,
right,
that you feel.
And I think something that's coming up for me right now is that, therapy in general, I think for many, many years in past generations, people didn't go to therapy. It was taboo.
There had to be something wrong with you if you went to therapy.
Right. You're going to be thrown in an institute, whatever. I mean, there was institutions for people that had issues, and, that wasn't that long ago, right? And when we think about
No, it was not.
And when we think about how quickly things have moved, and then it was all of a sudden it was okay to go to talk therapy, but it was like, wait a second, I'm a whole person, right? I have these things in my body, and that is something that really helped me break through. When I was sort of plateauing in my therapy, I kept thinking, like, this isn't just my head. It's got to be stored somewhere. And I was doing a lot of different modalities and healing modalities that were kind of coupled with therapy. Mm-hmm. And now I'm at the point where I can know exactly where the things are stored, and I'm working through them in a different way. And again, we're not trying to tell anybody what to do. This is not what we do on this podcast. We just share our experience, and, but you can't ignore the body. You cannot.
Oh, I know a lot of people who do it very well.
Yes.
It's when we say the body, what are we talking about?
Right.
Here's the thing, and come back to that question about, somatic psychotherapy and, and where did it come from?
Right.
That it really started out, and this is one level of it. I'm talking to you and you say to me suddenly, well, where do you feel that in your body?
Right.
Or people will start, group gatherings with, okay, let's just sit quietly, tune into what are your thoughts, what are you feeling, and what's happening in your body, or vice versa. It can go bottom up or down. And then they leave it there. And I go, okay, the whole point.
And what do you do with that?
is yes. What do you do with that?
Right.
Is exactly what I do.
Right.
In therapy, by using a mix of what language you're using. There are words we use. Here's how I think of language. Language carries the energy of our experience.
Yes.
Okay. So,
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
It's language carries the energy of our experience.
It does. Back in when was it? I don't know, 70s or so, Noam Chomsky was pushing transformational grammar. And it has since been debunked. Okay. Well, I'm not worried about Noam Chomsky because he's done fine.
Yeah.
But the truth is that when I studied transformational grammar at Teachers College in Columbia, his protege, Peter Rosenthal, came to teach it. It was fresh off the presses.
Interesting.
And the one thing I really got was, the generative nature of the lens through which Chomsky looked at language. What does it mean? It means that he, instead of looking at grammar, horizontally, trying to match it to Latin.
Right.
Right? Because Latin. Yeah. And what it was he described it as a series of small decisions that took place. And you get to the surface structure and that's your sentence.
Right.
But there is so much that happened before you say, I love that plant. There's a lot behind I love that plant, right? And so what it parallels is that bottom up piece of, our reactions start in our body.
Right.
And, an emotion is there. And if we can't identify the emotion, we really have trouble identifying what we need.
Oh, absolutely. Step one. And emotion is just energy in motion. So
there you go.
And I think people get that confused because when you're in an emotional state, specifically what would be considered a negative, I don't really like that word, but something that is maybe traumatic emotional state, it can be really overwhelming. I mean, it's really hard. And getting through here in that state.
Well, you're not connected to your consciousness.
Right,
you can't think.
Right.
If there's a very important developmental piece to this. Okay. And I've actually been doing a lot of work this past year with the birth process itself. And
I've heard about some of this.
Yes, the birth you get imprints during the actual birth process.
Right.
And those show up. And they show up with retained primitive reflexes. They show up with missing reflexes.
Wow.
And so rather than just saying, where do you feel that in your body, which is helpful,
right?
Of course.
It's kind of the beginning, though.
Well, in my view, yes. But, it's, I would much rather hear that somebody is going to someone who was trained in traditional therapeutic techniques, talk therapy, and by now, most people get the traumas in the body, and they're taking somatic experiencing, they're taking sensory motor psychotherapy.
This
EMDR.
Is definitely, I've done a lot of EMDR in the past. Yeah. This is, what I want to call the next kind of wave, and it's here, right?
Yeah.
We're in New York City. Things tend to happen a little faster, right?
I hate to disappoint you, but we were doing this in California in the Bay Area.
Oh, I'm sure California is always like 10 steps ahead when it comes to all of this. But it does feel like this is the next wave, right? We understand that this is real, and it's very hard to heal if you're not acknowledging and ultimately working through this piece of a human.
Yes, the human experience, because it literally pulls you back. When people are unfocused,
right?
And they, there is something that was supposed to happen,
right,
that didn't, or was disrupted.
Something unexpected.
Yeah, something, not everything is trauma. Sometimes there's disruption. But if, like anything else, if, I don't know, you're looking at the insides of a car and the timing belt fell off the housing.
Right.
Then what do? Talk to it? No.
That's very funny.
You
need to put yourself back on there.
Yes.
What are you doing?
Exactly.
Now you need to go pick it up, put it back on.
I know. It's not. By the
way, that's a very good analogy.
But so the rest of the system gets thrown off.
Right.
So if I'm worried about something,
right,
like a deadline, and all I can focus on is, oh my God, I'm not going to make the deadline, then it's very difficult. People, procrastination, it's very difficult to to start the step by step, because the energy of that is going to overcome everything.
Right.
And so working with your trauma, moving it through your body so that the charge isn't there.
Right.
Is the idea. Then you can notice, I used to walk down that street and I never noticed there were flower pots all along. How long have they been there? Oh, they've been there. I just never noticed.
Right.
Things like that, you never notice.
Right. And that's really important. I think we need to pause there and that is essentially what it is that Talia does, right? Mm-hmm. There's these things that exist, these things that happen to us in our life, and we have to deal with them. And there's a lot of different ways to deal with them. And I think if you are someone or someone that has been to a bunch of talk therapists and tried to kind of break through that wall,
seek someone out who has somatic training of some kind.
Yes.
Look, I'm kind of the bridge, and I have been since I got into this. I'm not, except for my PhD, I am not trained, not trained. I am trained, but I'm not, I don't have degrees in psychology.
Right.
In the late 90s and early 2000s, PhDs who had nowhere to go in academia came and started teaching. Peter Levine started teaching. There's a guy by the name of Bill Bowen, who I studied with, who was a sculptor.
Oh, interesting.
Who turned licensed, practitioner, and worked with the body. He studied with Alexander Lowen, who was Wilhelm Reich's, protege. He studied with Elizabeth Marker and body dynamics, and he brought all of that into the cauldron that was becoming sensory motor psychotherapy and somatic experiencing. Somatic experience is kind of the last one to hop on the train,
right?
But this was all about look at what the body is telling you,
right?
And ask good questions and work with the body, and then see what the language is doing, what the narrative, how the narrative has changed.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are those, the word siren is coming up, which is a slightly negative word, but there are kind of those sirens in life when you get to the point, and that is a lot of when I realized that something had to change in my life because I wasn't well.
Yeah.
I wasn't feeling well. I had migraine headaches and not sleeping, and, there's just a lot that went into just racing thoughts. And if you don't figure out a way to, stop that train from going, that's when things can get really tough. And I think what's important is that there are a lot of people now, and you've been a champion of this work for a long time. There are more people that are accepting this and understanding, and there's more research that has gone into it. And the last few questions that I have for you, first of all, I just want to say thank you, because I learned so much, and I learned so much in speaking to you before we ended up recording this podcast. What you do is so incredibly important to the connection that we're going to have with ourselves in this new age. The only way that we're going to be able to solve all of the problems on this planet is if we start with us.
Yeah.
It's an inside job until you can get to the point where you feel you can serve. And I'm sitting here today. 2 years ago, I could have never done this.
Well, we talked about this is about safety. And it's like, how do I feel
everyone
safe?
Is looking for. Think about everything you see on the news and everything that we went through during COVID. Our safety has been called into question. The collective unconscious, right? The way that the system is set up.
Unfortunately,
most people don't feel safe.
Well, unfortunately, safety is becoming very cloistered.
Yeah.
Very, the other isn't safe.
Yep. Absolutely.
It's...
This city's not safe.
Yeah.
I can't do this thing. And the more and more we fall into some of our own accord, much of not of our own accord, of our conditioning or whatever, it's a slippery slope. And
it is a slippery slope.
And there is a way out. There is a way out, and you can do it for yourself. with the help of, wonderful folks like Talia and other modalities and methods. And I do believe that this is a really big way that we're going to be able to step into the healing of the humankind on this planet. This is not just an American issue. It's not just
oh no,
it's planets wide.
Well, it's a direction. It's a direction. And but it's what's hard to watch now when it's sort of like I can look at someone and I can see where perhaps doing something that would help integrate a reflex that was a primitive reflex that just got lost, and and it would change their lives, and change what they're doing, or become a tool to organize. This is about organization,
right?
Yeah,
and more tools in your toolkit.
More tools in your toolkit. More, widening the lens through which you look.
I love that. Because it's all about your perspective. And when you're coming from a place of where you don't feel triggered and traumatized multiple times a day, you can really settle into your being. Our true nature is not to be traumatized and freaking out. And it's not our true nature.
Well, but we also have to remember the cultural aspect of it. And I'm not trying to be, politically correct or something, but it's really true. It wouldn't hurt to be politically correct. However, it happens to be absolutely true that I can't expect someone who is sitting in a house being shelled or bombed. Right. I don't care what country you're in, what side of the border you're on.
Absolutely.
You can't expect someone to go, oh wait, well, hold on, let me meditate. It'll all go away.
Let me get into my body.
It won't.
No.
Unfortunately, this world is becoming more and more and more traumatized.
Absolutely.
And the more traumatized we are, and the more we feed ourselves with fear,
right?
Hello media,
right?
That the lens becomes that field. We enter into a field.
We come into that.
We come into that trauma field,
and it's the constriction of the lens as opposed to the widening of the lens.
Well, yes.
And even when I think about that or feel that, it feels different, right? If all you think is things are terrible, that's your reality, right? That's what you're going to keep following, fear. I believe that fear is the real virus.
Yes. Trauma is about narrowing the perception, narrowing the vision, the hearing. The hearing becomes more acute. You stop breathing because you don't want to hear your breathing. You want to identify the threat.
Right.
So global traumatization is identifying the threat. Now, when there's a good reason,
right,
then you don't go to somebody and go, I have a meditation tape you can play when you're on the subway at 2:00 in the morning and you're not feeling too safe. It'll work.
Right, it'll be fine.
No,
Right.
But the idea is, how do I actually differentiate?
Right.
When there's really something going on and I need to actually move myself. So this is, when we talk about attachment gets a bad rap. It's misunderstood in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But attachment is a system that gets activated when the attachment system is evoked, when something's happening. Right. I'm not feeling safe. I hear a strange noise. I can't identify it. So identifying what's going on around us, when there's so much, this is what you're seeing, this is what you're hearing, this is what you should think.
Yeah.
So
it's constant.
So good therapy, we might say good therapy is actually encouraging you to trust yourself.
Right.
As well as trusting others. You can't trust somebody else if you don't trust yourself, because you can't see them. Yeah. And it's, we do as good a job as we can.
Yeah. It's an inside job.
It's an inside job with an outside result,
Yeah, and with a lot of outside influences.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that you brought that up. That was definitely something that I wanted to discuss, just what's going on today. Huge part of the space between, huge part of why I want to put this work out. How we relate to everything in our lives has shifted and changed. And so much of that has to do with the lack of safety and just the constant pumping of fear. And I keep saying, connect back to yourself, connect back to yourself. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful way to do that. And so incredibly important. So one last question. Our time is almost up, which is just crazy. I know it goes by so fast.
Yes.
So when you think of your work in somatic psychology, what do you hope for the future? We just talked about, where things stand today, and I'm going to choose to remain hopeful that there are different days ahead. Mm-hmm. What do you hope for the future of this work?
Well, some of what I hoped when I started out was that the bridge between somatics, right, the physical piece, Feldenkrais, Alexander, somatic movement therapy, is coming more toward the somatic psychology part. And the somatic psychology piece is understanding more of what somatics are. I think that if you sort of grabbed a somatic psychotherapist off the street and said, "What's somatics?" I don't think that the average person would really know the difference, but there is a difference.
Right.
Okay. So we want it to come together. But, I work with other somatic movement therapists because although I am one, the attachment piece, the adult attachment piece, and the birth process piece, they're really important.
Yeah.
And, you've got your slice of the pie.
Right.
So if I see something going on and I'm working, I actually send someone to do a few sessions with somebody else who can actually deepen that.
So it's an opening
It's an opening. So, I want us to understand how we work together, where our boundaries are.
Yeah.
And that there's hope. You can earn your security. That's why I tell people, you can earn your security.
That's amazing.
But you got to work at it. It's not just me.
Right.
I ran out of a fresh supply of magic jelly beans long ago, or I would have taken them, right? So
that's so perfect. Well, there's no magic pill. Every time I say magic pill, I'm going to say magic jelly bean because it just resonates better.
Yeah. Think of all the colors, right?
Absolutely.
No, but it's true. I mean, that is the flight response, actually. Tell me what to do. What should I do?
Right. Well, we're conditioned to consistently ask.
Well,
and this is what helps break that down and bring someone back to themselves.
It does.
And to trust and to trust yourself, to trust that you can handle whatever comes your way.
Yes.
And be okay.
Well, whatever, or know who to
right,
and up,
make a decision. Is there a decision? Is there not? Right, what needs to happen?
When I'm looking for someone to trust, I have to include me.
Yeah,
and I might make a mistake. I tell my clients I make a mistake at least twice a year.
Yeah.
I usually say that when I've made a mistake.
That sounds like something I would have said years ago. Now I'm like,
right.
I fuck up every single day. I feel like, and I'm so happy to feel so freeing to say that. And according to who, right? Like I'm on a whole different level now with it. Well, as long as I'm not hurting someone, it's like, it's all good.
I get very excited when I make a mistake.
Yeah.
I mean, don't try to make a mistake, but if somebody comes back and says, I don't like the way you handled that 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Well, the inside of me is going, oh, on the outside of me.
What the hell happened 2 weeks ago? Let me just get back there and step on.
It's like, now what did you do, Talia? Okay. So,
that's amazing.
But it's like, I'm so glad you're saying, okay, what is it? Let's look at it.
Right.
And if I stepped on your toe on the way out, I will say, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? And it will be done. But if it's something else, we're going to see what part of it you need to hear from me. Gee, I'm really sorry.
And this is also about awareness of self, awareness with others, walking in each other's shoes. This goes back to the first episode that I did with Daryl on what is the astrology of the space between.
Exactly.
Right? It's we walk in each other's shoes. Mm-hmm. And how can you even, I think you said something to this effect of how can you walk in someone else's shoes if you can't even walk in your own shoes? It's it's not possible. I want to thank you so much for coming.
Oh, you're welcome.
I would love to have you back. I feel like there's so many, I'm writing down themes of other things that we could talk about, but I appreciate your time so much today. And
you're welcome.
Thank you for joining us. So to everyone, thank you so much for joining us again in the space between. Talia, thank you so much. We will link a lot of things below, and there was some amazing resources that she mentioned. And please like and subscribe this episode. If you can share it with anyone that you think might benefit, we'd appreciate that. Comment. We'd love to hear from you guys. And we'll see you again in the space between. Thank you so much for joining us in the space between. We hope this conversation sparked connection for you. Please like, subscribe, and share this episode with someone who will find value. And make sure to tune into our next episode as we continue the journey into the core themes of our lives. We'll see you again in the space between.